We have lots of folks to thank, as usual, for helping make not only the DocYard season, but this screening possible. Huge thank you to the Battle Theater, our in-person venue partners and still our collaborators as part of the virtual screening series, to Jen, Lida, our colleagues at the Left Foundation, of which the DocYard is a program, and to Kayla Myers, the DocYard series coordinator, who does all of the behind-the-scenes technological magic and is, as you can see in the chat windows, helping moderate this conversation today. We'd also like to thank Oscilloscope for providing us with the file, for allowing the screening to happen, because this is in the strange time zone, kind of at the tail end of festivals for So Late, So Soon, which premiered almost a year ago at True False Film Festival 2020, one of the very last festivals to happen in person, and before the theatrical release, perhaps sometime later this year. So huge thank you to everyone. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Izzy, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Abby. I'm very, very happy to be here.
Yeah. So before I start off with my first question, I'd like to just say a few words about the film. So this is one of the most valuable things that I find about this project is this feeling of time passing, of time being spent, of the really difficult act of distilling down time, of preserving artwork that gains value and aura from the passage of time. There's so many ways in which all of this becomes visible, becomes evident in the film, in so many ways in which it remains unsaid and buried as well. So for me, there's a lot of things that are going on that perhaps the sharp-eyed viewer catches upon when watching the film. One being the fact that, Daniel, you yourself were a student of Jackie's when you were much younger. And also the fact that, I guess I'm just going to come out and say it, that you are in their house right now, doing this Q&A from a room that we've seen glimpses of in the film. So I kind of want to start at the end, so to speak, with where you are. Oh yes, and before that, I am a Chinese American woman with shoulder-length black hair. I'm wearing a black blazer, and I am myself seated in a white room. So yeah, Daniel, where are you, and what is your relationship with this house?
I'm Daniel Hymanson. I'm a white man with curly hair in front of tiled background and pastel blinds. I am in the house right now. We edited the film in Paris because that's where Izzy was, and so I had sort of last March, right when the pandemic started, I was subletting a place and staying at friends when we finished when we were finishing the film, and so didn't have a permanent spot. And then Jackie was incredibly kind and has let me stay here and quarantine here, and it's been a pretty incredible place to quarantine during this time. But for a long time, it's been a place that I've felt very, very at home at for a decade or so since I started and since I was a kid. But I've felt very, very comfortable here for a long time, and it's felt like a very special place to me.
Yeah. So you started filming this. You filmed for how many years? 8 years?
Yeah, over the course of around that. Yeah, most of the footage comes from the last few months that I was filming, actually.
Yeah. And so I'm wondering, when you first started filming, because this is something that you did right out of college, it appears, timeline-wise, what was the genesis of the project? Were you intending for it to be something that would be a longitudinal feature at that point? And I mean, even if so, what were kind of the indications that this would be a worthwhile project to return to, that this could be something that would develop into a feature?
It definitely didn't start out that way. Like I started out thinking it would be a short film, and sort of, yeah, just not something that I would film for a very long time. Like Jackie was always someone who was like very important to me ever since I like took an art class with her when I was a little kid, and someone who I felt very like lucky to know. And I sort of fell in love with her artwork and got to know her and Don over the years and would visit them at the house. And so like as soon as I sort of knew I wanted to make films, I knew I wanted to make a film about or with Jackie. But it started out as I hadn't watched a lot of nonfiction films. Like I didn't really know what sort of things I liked, and I knew that she was, and I also knew one part of her. Like I knew Jackie as like a teacher and as someone who's and as someone whose artwork I like admired and was sort of fascinated by, but I hadn't like spent that much time with her and Don. A couple times a year we'd sort of visit the house, always. And then when I was in high school, sort of like we played music together, we got a little closer, but I still didn't know them like very, very well. And then sort of shortly after graduating from college, we had been talking for a while about just like working on a project together, me and Jackie. And I was like, oh, this will be a project about like what I know of her. So like about her teaching and her artwork. And so for about 6 months, I was in Chicago and just interviewed Jackie about those things. And so that was like the film at that point. And then over that period, spending time with the two of them, I got to know them better, and we were hanging out more and getting even closer. And then I took that footage and was like all by myself. Like I didn't show anyone the footage, and I sort of edited like an hour-long version of that film, and showed some people. And like one, it was sort of like it was like incomprehensible and like just like didn't make any sense. But then also I sort of realized that like it didn't show what I felt was so special about being with Jackie and Don. It just like wasn't communicated through that footage. And so I was watching a lot of other films at that time and like thinking about what I liked in those films, and then also
yeah, what were some of your influences? Because I mean, as I wrote on Facebook to promote this screening, and as I thought about writing into the program notes for this film, there is this really clear subgenre of documentary films about artists who have been living together, and frequently these films take place in a reclos, in one house, in one room, that doubles as their studio, things like that. And it can run the gamut from the quirky character portrait to something that's quite a bit darker. And I think what's really fascinating about So Late, So Soon is that it starts in one modality and it kind of moves towards the other end. But how, like, I mean, this also includes films like The Wolf Pack, for instance. Like, how were you watching these films? Were you thinking about them? Because your film kind of, it boomerangs back and forth from present into the archival past, and it doesn't just stay in the house. We see, at the end, the retirement community, but Jackie also goes out and has a couple of meetings sometimes. What were you like? Were you watching these films and were you committing to that way of working and filming at the time too, or was it sort of incidental and more organic?
Yeah, I think more sort of just a reflection of like what Jackie and Don were up to at that time. And also that's where they felt most comfortable with me filming generally. Like to film somewhere else would be like a sort of big ask. Whereas filming at the house was easier, I think.
I feel like a lot of times that's interesting because a lot of times it's the other way around, right? Like your personal, like the house is such a reflection of what, like, and also a lot of times people don't like showing their quote unquote mess, right? But for Jackie and Don, I mean, it's like such a pride for them, but it's not like the spaces that they're occupying are like super glamorous or neat spaces or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Jackie like feels very or has felt very proud about her spaces and her environment, and so like that felt easier to her than maybe going somewhere else. And that's I think mostly just because that's where they were for the most part, so that's like where the film ended up taking place. And for some reason also a lot of the moments outside the house ended up not like working in the edit. Like they just didn't end up feeling right. And I think part of that's just because I felt more comfortable filming in the house. We had done it a million times. Like maybe that was part of it.
Yeah. So I'd like to bring Isidore Bethel, the editor of So Late, So Soon, into the conversation. When did Daniel contact you? Because I know that's how it worked out, or I think I do at least. And like in terms of the way that the two of you collaborated on the film, like how did this work? Because for those who don't know, Izzy lives on a different continent than Daniel. So, you know, what were sort of the parameters, the physical and also conceptual parameters of your collaboration?
Yeah, thank you, Abby. I'm delighted to be here. Just to like describe where I am a white man with dark blonde hair wearing a gray shirt with sort of like a paint splatter pattern on it. They're the vestiges of a spider bite from last week on my forehead. I'm on a gray couch drinking a little bit of vermouth, and there might be a corgi who walks in and out of the frame at certain moments. Daniel wrote me in the summer of, I want to say 2016, I think. We had a mutual friend, someone I went to high school with, and someone that he had gone to college with, whom we both like really loved. And she was like, oh, you two should get together. You're both in film. And Daniel wrote me. And he had seen a film that I had edited a couple of years ago called Of Men and War. And he'd really loved it. And he was in this sort of like ongoing long-term search for someone to like someday edit this massive material that he'd been accumulating for a certain amount of time at that point. We met very informally. It just happened that we were both in Chicago at that point. He didn't know I was in Chicago when he wrote me. I was doing graduate school at the Art Institute of Chicago at the time, just for a summer. And we had coffee, and it was really strange and like beautiful. And we didn't really talk about the film, but I was like, oh, this is someone who I'm really interested in. Because it was, Daniel was shooting with Jackie and Don, but the thing that was occupying the most of his time at that like point in his life was his parents had to leave Chicago for a medical emergency, and Daniel had sort of taken on the responsibility of cleaning their house. So like he was, I mean, I feel strange like telling this because Daniel's here and this is Daniel's story to tell, but I'll try to like tell it from my perspective, so I'm not like telling his story. But I remember just being like really fascinated by someone who was in his own life dealing with the legacy of his parents and like the physical domestic legacies of his parents, and then during the day would go and shoot these sort of like not necessarily surrogate parents, but older people whom he looked up to, who he loved, who he would argue with and like live with in the way that you might live with family members. And that kind of mirroring that was happening, that Daniel was like embracing and really engaging with deeply, to me was, it struck me. It was like, oh, this is someone who I'm interested in spending time with. I mean, I'm also like, I have dated men who are much older than myself, and I'm really interested in what happens in the space between people and between generations, and like, how do we navigate that? How does that push us to communicate in different ways? And I found someone like sitting across from me having coffee in whatever that like trendy Chicago coffee shop was called, Intelligentsia. Someone who was like navigating similar space. And it wasn't until months later that like Daniel and I stayed in contact, but it was much more kind of like friendly contact. And it wasn't until much later that Daniel like actually verbalized, hey, what do you think about like maybe working on this film with me? And by that time, our relationship as like cinema friends had grown to such a point where it was like, of course, I want to work on your film. Like there's like, it was several months later and it was like, yeah, absolutely. Like this is an adventure that I want to be on.
Yeah. Yes, Intelligentsia is now, you know, chained across the US. So
Oh God.
yeah, it is a Chicago based you know, third rate coffee company. But I mean, it's really interesting to hear you talk about the mirroring that you saw perhaps in Daniel in your personal life, and then also in what would sort of also become the plot. If we are to call So Late So Soon something that is plot driven or tension filled, it is around you know, this idea of like the medical, like the health of one's body, and then because of that, you know, the ability to take care of a house that becomes overwhelming when, you know, I mean, there's all of these other concerns as well. But were you also making that connection, Daniel?
Probably not, I think. Yeah, I don't know if I thought about it, and I probably wouldn't have like articulated it like that at the time at all.
Yeah. So the reason why I'm interested in this and in probing this is because it's not often that we have a filmmaker, a director who also recorded and was the cinematographer for their film, which you are, Daniel, along with the editor of the film here. So we sort of have covered like all of the kind of crew positions that in better funded documentaries might be taken up by different people or multiples of different people. So I am really interested in kind of picking apart what to me makes this film so special, and then how the two of you came to pull this out of the raw material that was recorded. So, for instance, I think that the first time the film introduces something that's not observational material to be super interesting because it's not clear what register, what space we're operating in. Are the photos that are sort of being projected, and the corgi just entered the frame for Izzy, which is why I'm currently smiling. Because the photos that are sort of being quote unquote projected, or they're laid out on screen in a way that emulates them being projected in a slide carousel or something like that, the audio that we're hearing is not the pristine podcasty recorded voiceover audio that often accompanies these types of the use of archival in documentaries, which is, I feel like, usually kind of in an illustrative or B-roll capacity. But here, to me, it's not clear if Don and Jackie are talking about themselves, if the audio that's being excerpted is just so thematically kind of similar that it's creating this third space of cinema for me to imagine. I can hear birds in the background. You know, it seems like it's sort of diegetic, but something very strange is happening. So, first of all, like, that's not the only archival sequence. Some of them are a little bit more clear and traditional, but first of all, yeah, can you just talk about those, like perhaps both of you, the significance? Why is this first one introduced in this way?
I mean, I can maybe talk a little bit about what that is, and maybe Izzy can talk about sort of like how it operates there better than me.
Be my guest.
Yeah, Jackie, like for about 4 years, it seems like, carried around a tape recorder. And so she recorded like different conversations that her and Don had, her and her friends, like different family members and stuff. And so that was just like part of all the material we were looking through, and that conversation they have about sort of like the alligator and the mouse just like stuck out to me, and I think we both thought it was like funny and like and also particularly like telling of their relationship. Like it showed something about who they were and who they were together. And
kind of the first hint too of like marital stress, and this story too that Jackie keeps returning back to, like the proposal, the like, you know, the actual wedding itself, like something that seems to have dogged her for like decades and decades. This is kind of the first indication of that, it seems, in the film.
Yeah, like there's conflict there, and it just like it shows like, okay, there's like a fundamental difference between the two of them, and they're very aware of that.
I can pick up there and sort of talk about edit. I mean, that's kind of a segue into editing more generally, I think, because Daniel kind of handed me this massive material that included all of the stuff that he shot in the 2010s. And then it also included all of this archival material. But as an editor, I received them together, just knowing that a different person was lensing these different registers of material. But my attitude as an individual looking at all of it was identical. It was like, or identical is maybe an exaggeration, but it was similar. Like, what is speaking to me, what is moving me, confounding me, exciting me, like titillating me, those are moments that I'm going to like hold on to and see how they might cohere into a story or a movement or a flow of emotions. And I think that there was something, that audio was like very much on the outer limits of what was conceivable as material, because it was taped audio. Like, this is not film. This is, we're not making a podcast. But there was something that was so charming about Jackie and Don living out the parameters of their relationship as a game that feels like it's very much at the core of who they are. And it was evident that like this belongs in the film, and we're going to kind of like wrestle it into the film until it feels right. And we did a bunch of iterations with different imagery there that never was right. Like, we had a bunch of collaged images of different animals that Jackie had collected over the years. We had images of the two of them in Super 8 film. And there was something that was just like off. And it ended up being that just seeing them in these different iterations of their couplehood that complemented that funny alligator and mouse dialogue the best. And I think it also comes towards the beginning of the film because it opens the door to performativity and play as modes for serious questioning. Like, as you said, Abby, we hear doubts about the relationship in this conversation, even though it's like a gag. And I think sometimes for both of them, the ways that serious doubt comes out is through the intermediary of art or like dramaturgy, especially during the period of time when Jackie was recording with a tape recorder and the two of them were recording with a Super 8 camera. There was a lot of like playing dress up as a way of figuring out how they felt about themselves and about each other and about living in that house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I have many follow-up questions to what you just said about this, because I think this idea of performativity and like living life on stage, particularly in this house where, I mean, the house is the installation, is the artwork in a lot of ways. But I just want to remind the audience, anyone that's joining in now or recently, we are taking questions at any point during this Q&A. So if you have anything to ask, either Daniel or Izzy or both of them, feel free to just drop it into chat, whether you're on Facebook or listening in to the Zoom webinar. And we'll incorporate them when we receive the questions. So my next question is I guess I'd like to probe a little bit deeper about this idea of opening the door to performativity and to play, because a lot of the the middle third of the film centers around some quite intense arguments that they are having and that Jackie and Don are having. And some of them are a little bit milder and they are conceptually quite interesting because Jackie and Don are kind of disagreeing about how to talk about art and works in progress. So my kind of part one of the question is, what was there anything in those conversations and in consuming that material that has affected the way that both of you talk about works in progress, about dealing with art? Quizzed look, so perhaps not. But then my kind of deeper question is about the negotiation that happens when deciding what portions of people's lives to put into a linear narrative. What was the balance like between the more lighthearted first third and then this quite a lot darker, more intense middle third? Like, how are you making decisions about what was important to include and what perhaps to leave out?
Well, I think like two, like as far as sort of like the decision for that, sort of like for how the film evolves and sort of transitions into that second half, like I think I didn't have sort of like a very concrete idea about how I wanted the film to like be when we were editing it really from the beginning. But I think something that I did feel was that I wanted it to be some sort of like a reflection of my experience with Jackie and Don over the course of 5 or 10 years or however long it took to like make the film. And because that was like an incredibly valuable time to me. And so like I wanted it to be some sort of a reflection of that experience, and I wanted it to feel that way when like I watched the film. And that transition, I think, happened like in their lives as I was able to see and sort of like as I experienced when I was with them. Like it sort of became it like when I was filming and like our conversations and the like, it just became more about like health and like Don's health and their relationship and trying to sort of like and sort of how it was becoming harder to live in the house. Sort of that sort of just felt like that was a natural progression that sort of reflected how my experience of spending time with them. And then also, as far as like what to put into like the linear narrative, I think that's like a hard question because like I think for me there were a lot of that was just like, I know that I love Jackie and Don, does this feel okay to me? Like does it like feel all right? And then showing other people and sort of being okay with how they also saw those moments. And that was sort of, and there were definitely things that we took out because after showing people, like it didn't feel okay. But yeah, I think.
Do you mind just kind of going deeper into that? Would this be like moments, like what sort of feedback meant doesn't feel okay? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is maybe a bad example, but like there was like at one point Jackie is like frustrated because she's having trouble sort of with maintenance, like keeping up the house. And we used to have a moment where she said, like, look at all this beauty around me. She was sort of like worried about leaving the home and sort of like talking about how beautiful it was around her. And we cut to these like frames, like frames around the house that I had shot, like of her installations. But we showed those to people, and people were like, this just sort of looks like mess, like it doesn't look like what I thought it was, which were like me sort of like framing these art pieces. It just sort of looks like chaos and mess around objects around the house. And so it was having like the like totally opposite effect.
Right, because they thought that you were making fun of her when
exactly.
she was saying like, look at all the beauty around me, and then you cut to mess. So it was, yeah.
And so like what like my or our lesson was from that, I felt like was framing the artwork like that doesn't work, because that's not how the artwork works. Like you can't, like, for me to like actually try to place her work in like a frame like that just like doesn't really work. And so like don't do that. But that was like from a response from people. And then like there were other moments, arguments between them, moments where Jackie was acting a certain way, and just like I know her so well that having people and Izzy got to know her so well also from watching so much footage, that like having people respond in certain ways let me know that how I was seeing that footage wasn't exactly how it felt to other people. Not that you can control how it feels to everyone, but like it was nice to get a sense of that.
I think not necessarily from how Jackie talks about her works in progress with Don, but just from Jackie in general. I feel like I started working on this film at the same time that I started teaching at universities. And I think there's something about the way that Jackie teaches, and I see her as someone who's a teacher throughout the whole film. She's teaching Daniel how to film her, basically. Like there's something of that in the whole film. And something that I learned from her working with these images of her is that like it's so important to have fun. And that like if I'm going to do something on a daily basis and I'm going to do it well, I need to have fun doing it. And like I need to insist that fun is an important part of my job. Because I think the reason that Jackie is a beautiful like person and artist and has such a vibrant like a daily practice is because there's love and there's fun and there's like curiosity and humor in everything she's doing, and those are essential both to art making, the kind of art making that I want to practice, and to the kind of teaching that I want to practice, where you're like accompanying other people on like strange journeys that they want to chart out for themselves. So that's to answer that. And then I think, yeah, I mean, I think Daniel sort of answered the other question. There were moments when I was much more fascinated by emotional intensity in the footage, but that clearly put off other viewers, even if it was something that like I was excited by. And it was doing rough cut screenings with like 20 or 25 people, where people would be like, oh, they're purely angry, or they're purely unhappy, or they're purely like out of touch with the rest of the world, which were not things that I felt about them. Like they felt superhuman, super connected to everything that I feel as a human being. But if these 25 people that we screen for like multiple times over the span of a year feel differently about these scenes, then there's something about the way that I'm crafting them that's not landing in the right way. So it really was like getting outside points of view, and then like chiseling little by little how we were sculpting these scenes. And we didn't change them dramatically based on viewer feedback. It was much more just like, oh, that line of dialogue is like triggering people and sending them on the wrong path. Like, let's cut that back a little bit. And at the end of the day, the barometer was really like, does Daniel feel like this is a loving portrait of these people who are complicated, who can be angry, who can be sad, but who are beautiful artists, with whom he has this like loving relationship.
Yeah, I think it's a quite interesting line to talk about these days, because there's so much in the documentary world about collaboration with participants, with subjects, with you know, being really careful about how people are portrayed. And it's led, I feel like, to a lot of kind of rough edges being sanded off of quite a lot of films, where kind of difficult moments that can be really intimate are kind of pried off. Because it's interesting to hear to me the types of adjustments that you were making, where in fact, you know, sort of like you, what was so important to you about keeping those moments, like those arguments specifically in the film? Because another solution would be to, you know, remove them.
I think they're really fucking good at arguing, and that's beautiful to me. Like they turn into these like superhero versions of themselves when they argue, and they know how to mobilize their beings in the way that they argue, and it's like it's electrifying. Daniel has, I'm sure, a totally different take on that. But
do you feel like it's sort of campy? It's like amped up for the camera?
I don't think it's amped up for the camera. I think it's amped up for themselves, because they kind of like, they get off on it a little bit. And like Daniel's this great pretext, except that Daniel was just like always there for years and years. So I don't know.
I don't know.
Did you, Daniel, feel like you were like a witness? Because I have experienced situations at like work with friends where like something that I had nothing to deal with, like I get dragged into an argument, right? Because like the people who are doing the arguing, they want a witness. They want like someone to be there, and whether or not it's someone who's willing to cast judgment afterwards on like, you know, party A is right versus party B is right, like the feeling of like somebody being there seems to be very important oftentimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think like I think like they're aware that I'm there all the time, so it's like hard for that not to be some part of their interaction there. And I think there are varying levels of to what extent you're sort of capable of controlling yourself and your emotions. It's hard for me to know what's exactly sort of like being amped up for like some sort of performance thing, or whether they want me there or not for it. I think it for Jackie, the things that felt sensitive, I don't think were necessarily those moments. Like, you know, like it's like when I first, there's a film that I like a lot, A Married Couple, and like in that film, Alan King would like show dailies of like the shoot to the people he was filming, and like I started doing something a little bit like that, but then Jackie would be angry that there was like a dark broom in the background of a shot. Like that's what she would be. Yeah. She would be like, that's like you can't use that. Like that's unacceptable.
It was ruining her like mise en scène of the installation of the house.
Yeah. It's like the colors weren't right, but like her, like arguing or crying or something like that would be, it just like wouldn't really faze her as being sensitive. So I do think like, yeah, I don't know. I think that the things that she would maybe be more cautious about or performative during or something, or like, I just think it would be she just thinks about it a different way.
Yeah. I mean, it's sometimes hard to remember that people have pretty varying reasons for participating in projects like this. And we got a super interesting question in the Q&A from Sarah, who asks, what does the movie mean to Jackie? What did it mean to Don? And how do you think about documenting as paying tribute? Great question, Sarah.
To Don, I don't know. I mean, Don never saw it. Don died about 1.5 years ago. And so Don never saw like the end product of the film, which, you know, is too bad. But I feel incredibly lucky to have been able to, like so lucky to have been able to spend like a decade with him, like having that relationship. And I think that like for him, that's what the film meant mostly. I think also for Jackie, for the most part, that's what it meant. When we were filming it, it was more so I don't actually know, but I think like we got to spend a bunch of time together. Like the film was, I would come over sometimes like twice a week for a couple hours and films that with long periods of sort of breaks. And then we'd like have dinner or like have like a 3 p.m. strange dinner. But like that was what the film was. Like it was like that experience. And I think in some ways me filming was like something to get out of the way because we all enjoyed sort of hanging out together. So it was like sometimes for Don, maybe it was just like putting up with the camera sometimes. I mean, but every time I showed him footage, I think he liked it. And I felt very, very like encouraged by him. But I think a lot of it was just like we were all able to hang out and spend time together. For Jackie, she's like very, very proud of the film now, which like means a lot to me because she obviously put like a ton of her life into it and time and work into this film also. And so it's nice. Yeah, it means so much to me that she obviously like that she also feels proud of it and thinks it's funny.
So Jackie has accompanied you in person or virtually to a few festivals to do Q&As afterwards. Because the DocYard is focused on the craft of filmmaking, I decided to ask Izzy to join us instead of Jackie, but we would have loved to have had Jackie as well. What does she say, at those Q&As? What do people ask her? How does she, present her being in the film,
I could say one just quick thing, and then I'll let you answer it because you're obviously better, like in a better position to answer it. But she, in the times that I've seen her do Q&As with Daniel, she always manages to like very early on say that she doesn't see Daniel as like a 30-year-old. She sees him as this 4-year-old who is in his class even today. And for her, there's just this great love and pride for this 4-year-old who made this film that she loves so much.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we've only done like 2 Q&As with her. So like there haven't been that many, but
okay. Well, maybe then just because those are the only 2 that I've seen, because it falls in Indie Memphis, I thought it must have been every single one, but my sample size is only 2.
Yeah, I mean, I think she. I don't know if there's any specific way she approaches those. She's just like, yeah, I'm not sure. As far like the second part of Sarah's question though, like as what was it like making a
documenting as paying tribute. So I think there's multiple ways in which the act of documenting works in this film. There's the film about Jackie and Don. There's also them trying to archive their own work and document their own artistic legacies with the videos that they've shared with you. Now that I've learned as Jackie, like carrying a tape recorder around with her everywhere. Like how did that come into your process?
I guess like I was very grateful for the time that I had making the film and filming them and finding all that footage. And so like the film's like a tribute in that it like shows what some things that I love about these people during this like sliver of time that I got to spend with them. I guess like it's not like a tribute to like who Jackie and Don are. It's like because they're way more than this film or that I knew of them like at all. But it's like like a tribute to maybe like some aspects of them that I love. that I saw, and that Izzy
Yeah,
also
or
saw
perhaps
through
also
the
to the
footage.
time that you spent together.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think tribute, it's a difficult word, right? Because you know, I think most filmmakers when they're making like biographical documentaries try to stay away um from like the hagiographic, like just only saying positive things. But it's interesting to consider even a film that can be as raw and as honest and as real as So Late So Soon as something that is still perhaps paying tribute, because it is so infused with like deep emotion for what Jackie and Don are going through, and this sort of inevitable end, the end of the film, and also the end of you know, their time together in the house. So Izzy, did you have something to?
It doesn't seem like a question that's relevant to me because I didn't choose to make a film about the. I mean, I guess I chose to make a film with the material that I saw. I didn't choose, and obviously these people are part of that material. But I think another set of material filmed with Jackie and Don, I wouldn't have been interested in editing. You know.
Mm-hmm.
So like it doesn't, it seems
Yeah.
like much more a question for Daniel than for me.
Oh yeah, I mean, I thought at one point you wanted to jump in, so that's why okay. No, there's no, you know, no one's being forced to answer any questions here, so there's no need to, yeah. So we are coming upon the end of an hour. Time flies during the pandemic, but I wanted to end by asking both of you, you know, what are you currently working on, if anything? Um, because there is this pressure during the pandemic, I think, to be productive, but I'm curious, Daniel, if you'd like to talk about your work within the house, actually, because I find that pretty curious, but I don't know if you would like that to share that with everybody else.
Sure. I mean, like I'm working on something that is like about my experience being here and Jackie leaving the house and sort of the process of saying goodbye to it, I guess. And then just my experience sort of being in this place. Yesterday I was with her. We've been doing a lot of like window, like conversations, but a lot of like we were thinking about these ducks in the pond outside her window. But it's also sort of about like her environment. The ducks are part of her environment. I don't know, but that, yeah. So I've been working on it's still like, yeah, very chaotic and sort of I'm unsure exactly what it is, but
I'll maybe piggyback on that and also kind of riff off something that Ruth mentioned in the comments, where since the end of the film, Jackie has moved to a facility that I think it's a 2-room space that she occupies, right, Daniel?
Mm-hmm.
And she has, because Ruth mentioned something that is absolutely true in the facility that Don was in, where it crushes what makes Don so special. It's this totally like anesthetized environment. What Jackie has done in a relatively similar facility is she has left the house behind, but she has brought her installations into these 2 rooms and adapted them into these 2 rooms. I remember when she first moved in, Daniel was there with her, I think, and sent me this video, like a walkthrough of this kind of grotesque but cutesy but hard-edged dollhouse interior that is what Jackie had created her like assisted living facility interior to be. I don't know, that felt so like, yes, that's an institution that like crushes people and like takes a lot away from people, and Jackie has found a little corner for herself to continue to invent ways of staying herself.
Yeah, and I just saw
I silenced you, Daniel, sorry.
I just saw Ruth's comment too, and I think it's really beautiful. And And I would just like to read it out loud. Not so much a question, more a comment. As an older audience member, I found myself both moved and intensely interested by Jackie and Don's attempt to invent a way of aging while staying themselves. The part where Don becomes a patient shows how institutions can strip us of our identity.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like related to what Izzy was saying, it's like being in that place for Jackie has been like incredibly difficult because her identity was so sort of like linked to this place that she had spent 50 years creating. And so it's been hard, but like he said, like she has made it her own. I mean, it very much looks like a Jackie Seiden environment, and it's new. It's not like she just like took the installations from here and put them there. Like it's like a new space, but is hers. But I think it has been difficult because it doesn't to her it doesn't like feel like it like quite like home maybe.
Yeah.
But it's like very beautiful.
Well, they also confine her installations to her own 2-room suite, I assume, and she's not allowed to do things in the common areas.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's kind of like the appearance of being able to customize things, but you're still you're like limited.
So it's like this incredible experience, like walking through a hall that's like pretty sterile, and they have like this music playing. I like the place, but it is pretty sterile. And like you walk through the hall, and then you like open her door, and it's just like, whoa, it's just like a very, very different type of environment.
Yeah. Well, any last words? Any more updates from yourself or from Jackie that you'd like to share?
I don't think so. Thank you so much, Abby, for inviting us and doing this.
Yeah, thanks for a lively conversation, debating and discussing so many aspects of the thorny parts of constructing, filming, living, inhabiting with documentary film subjects. It was really fantastic. Again, we are screening this film virtually until Thursday at 11:59 Eastern Time. And then the next DocYard film, starting a week and a half from today, on the Friday after next, is Gushue's The Choice, or Family Meeting, as the Chinese title is. And this is a single shot, 1 hour long film that is similarly about some difficult choices that a family has to make about the medical condition of one of their aunts. And the whole family is getting together, and over the course of 1 hour, perhaps they come to some sort of conclusion about what happened. But the film is far more interested in the hierarchies that dictate when people speak, what order they speak in, where they sit at this family meeting. It's a totally fascinating observational film. So thank you. On that note, thanks again, Daniel and Izzy. And this, yeah, well,